Hi, in this lecture we are gonna study the oil pumps. The oil pump may be located in the oil pan or mounted to the front of the engine. Its purpose is to supply oil to cool, clean and lubricate the various moving parts in the engine. The pump is normally driven by the crankshaft and creates suction to draw oil from the oil pan through a strainer. The pump suction creates pressure that forces the oil through the oil filter to various passages, and the oil then returns to the oil pan. An oil pump doesn't create oil pressure, it merely moves oil from one place to another. Oil pumps are positive displacement pumps. That is, the amount of oil that leaves the pump is the same amount that enters it. So output volume is proportional to pump speed. As engine RPM increases, pump output also increases. As oil leaves the pump, it passes through many passages. These passages restrict oil flow, and these restrictions are what cause oil pressure. So small passages cause the pressure to increase, larger ones decrease the pressure. This is why excessive bearing clearances will decrease oil pressure. The increased clearances reduce the increase to oil flow and consequently increase the volume of oil circulating through the engine. This decreased resistance and increased volume lower the pressure of the oil. The ability of an oil pump to deliver more than the required volume of oil is a safety measure to ensure lubrication of vital parts as the engine wears. So oil pressure is also determined by the viscosity and temperature of the oil. High viscosity oil has more flow resistance than low viscosity oil. And we will move right now to study the types of oil pumps. Oil pumps are driven by the camshaft or crankshaft. In newer engines, the oil pump is driven by the crankshaft, and integral pumps are driven directly by the crankshaft, and others are driven by a chain or gear. How the pump is driven is dictated by the location of the pump. Some oil pumps have an intermediate or drive shaft that is driven by a gear on the camshaft, and other pumps are driven by an auxiliary shaft meshed with the camshaft. The most commonly used oil pumps are the rotor and gear types. A typical rotor type pump has an inner rotor and an outer rotor, which is driven by the inner rotor, and the outer rotor always has one more loop than the inner rotor. When the rotors turn and the rotors loop and mesh, oil is drawn into that space. As the rotor continues to run, the oil becomes trapped between the loops, cover the plates, and the top of the pump cavity. It's then forced out of the pump body by the meshing of the loops, and this squeezes the oil out and directs it through the engine. And the second type of pumps is the gear type pumps. Gear type pumps use a drive gear which is connected to an input shaft and a driven gear. Both gears trap oil between their teeth and the pump cavity wall. As the gears rotate, oil is forced out as the gear teeth and mesh, so the output volume per revolution depends on the length of the depth of the gear teeth. Another style of gear type oil pump uses an idler gear with internal teeth that spins around the drive gear. In this style of pump, often called a crescent or a trochoidal type, the gears are eccentric. That is, as the large gear turns, it walks around the smaller one, moving the oil in the space between. So the rotor type moves a greater volume of oil than the gear type because the space in the open loop of the outer rotor is greater than the space between the teeth of the gears of a gear type pump. In order to regulate the pressure, we have the pressure regulation. The faster an oil pump turns, the more oil it will move, therefore its output pressure increases. So a pressure regulating valve or relief is used to control the pump's maximum pressure. Excessive oil pressure can lead to poor lubrication due to the oil blowing past parts rather than flowing over them. So a pressure regulator valve is loaded with a closely calibrated spring that allows oil to bleed off at a given pressure. So when the pressure from the pump reaches a preset level, a check valve, ball or plunger unseats and allows the oil to return to either the inlet side of the pump or to the crankcase. So high pressure oil pumps are basically stock pumps with a stronger relief valve spring. The spring delays the opening of the valve until a higher pressure is reached.